All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Today is the October 4th, 2018 meeting of the Sacramento County Community Corrections Partnership. I welcome everyone, and I welcome our guests today who are here to make a presentation we look forward to. I will, at this point, turn it over to the clerk and ask her to establish a quorum, please.
Good morning. Christian?
Here.
Bielenson? Ferguson?
Here.
Wagstaff?
Here.
Garrett? Connolly? Freeworth?
Here.
Schubert, Grippy?
Here.
Lester? Here. Gordon? Walker?
Here.
Chief Seal?
Here.
And you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Would you please read the statement?
Yes. This meeting of the Sacramento County Community Correction Partnership is being cablecast on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel on the Comcast Consolidated Communications and AT&T Uverse. This meeting replays on Saturday, October 6th at 3 p.m. and Sunday, October 7th at noon on Channel 14. This meeting is simultaneously webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. Please call Metro Cable at 874-7685 for up-to-date replay dates and times. A DVD copy of this meeting can be requested through the clerk 7 to 10 days after the meeting. If you have any electronic devices, we ask that you silence them at this time so we do not have interruptions during the meeting. If you wish to address the Community Corrections Partnership on any item on the agenda or not on the agenda, please fill out a gold speaker form, which are located at the back of the chambers, and give it to the clerk, and we will call you at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will you please call the first item on the agenda?
Yes. Item number 1, presentation from the Public Policy Institute of California on local findings from their multi-county study on public safety realignment.
Thank you. Ms. York, do you have anything by way of explanation before we invite our guests up?
I provided a staff report that summarizes the multi-county study that PPIC embarked on starting in 2013, and they've been working with our county along with 11 other counties since then, and since also incorporated Proposition 47 in their study. And I'll let Riken Gritte explain more about the study. They've been working with both the Sheriff's Department and probation primarily, but the entire county on.
Thank you. And at this time, we will welcome Riken Gritte.
Thank you. It's great to be back here. One thing I will need to get started is our PowerPoint slides that are...
Okay.
Thanks. Great, thank you. As Catherine said, this is a project that we started in 2013, and we are at a phase where we're kind of going around to the counties and presenting findings, and we've already presented findings to the sheriff and the probation department. Chief Seal asked that I come and provide all of you a little briefing of what we're seeing in the data, and then talk a little bit about the next steps. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. So basically what I'm going to talk about today is sort of summarized in this slide, which is just sort of a little overview slide. I'll talk a little bit about this project. It's been a few months, maybe a year and a half or so since we've been in front of you, and I'd like to sort of take the opportunity to refresh your memory about what the project's about. And then really the focus of the discussion will be on research that we produced over the last 10 months or so that represents our analysis of the data that you provided in terms of what we're seeing in terms of changes in jail and probation populations, but then also some discussion of recidivism outcomes in the aftermath of both realignment and Prop 47. And we'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about next steps. Just a little bit of background. This is a project that started actually, the planning of it started in 2012, and if you can remember back in those days, everybody was quite concerned about how public safety realignment was going to play out in different counties, and PPIC had begun to do some research in the corrections area and recognized that it was going to be kind of essential that we reach out to and start to work with counties and not just focus all of our attention on the state level systems, because the realignment and then many of the subsequent reforms really were about shifting authority for the management of offenders to counties, although quite frankly the that authority had existed long prior to that, and in some ways, realignment sort of forced us to recognize that a lot of the important things that happen in the corrections world are happening within counties. So we partnered with the Board of State and Community Corrections. We're a nonprofit, independent research institute. We're not a governmental entity. We're not affiliated with any universities. We're funded out of an endowment that allows us to sort of maintain our independence and have a kind of nonpartisan, neutral approach to policy issues. The board had been recently formed and had as part of its responsibilities to provide a summary of research findings to the counties, and also to be a place that synthesized and acted as a clearinghouse for data collection efforts, which was centrally emphasized in realignment and most of the subsequent reforms that have come afterwards to try and drive community corrections and correction systems throughout the state towards more evidence-based, data-driven kinds of approaches. We embarked on a kind of a discussion tour with all the major state-level stakeholders to try and see what they would want to see in a project like this, and to sort of frankly get some buy-in that this was a relevant, important thing to do. Sheriff's Association, CSAC. My collaborator on this project, the main PI is Mia Bird, and she's actually talking to CSAC today, so that's why you get me. But we also talked to the sheriffs and the chief probation officers and CDCR and DOJ to sort of solicit their participation and interest in the project. And then we went around to 12 counties that we selected that were designed to be reflective of the state as a whole. We got some valley counties, some northern, southern, coastal counties, large counties, small counties, medium-sized counties. And together these counties actually comprise 2/3 of the state's population, 2/3 of the population of the correctional population in the state, and they together kind of reflect the racial and ethnic diversity of the state as well. We went around to these counties. We were told that, in a way, that it would be unlikely that the counties would want to participate, but so we had our 12 counties that we really wanted to work with, and then we had a sort of a depth chart of another set of counties to replace in case the county said no. All of the counties ended up saying yes, so it was great, and we were really delighted that everybody seemed to be very enthusiastic about moving towards kind of more data-driven, and saw an advantage to working with us to try and do things like track data that would allow us to put together data from different sources, to link sheriff's data with probation data, to link both sheriff and probation data with DOJ and CDCR records, to kind of get as in-depth, wide-angle kind of view on individual offenders as possible moving through these systems in the wake of realignment. The general goals of the project are to sort of assess, all of the major policy changes that have happened in the state. And as you know, as keen observers, the state hasn't really taken a deep breath to pause and look at any one policy, but it's been wave after wave of policy changes. And so we originally designed this project in relation to realignment, but naively thinking that might be it for a while, and then subsequently there's been reform after reform, and the data that we're collecting actually puts us in a good position to be able to assess the impacts of those reform, and hence today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Prop 47. Some of the other major reforms, marijuana legalization, Prop 57 are some of the more recent kinds of reforms. Bail reform are also things that we're aiming to be able to incorporate into the data once we update the data with fresh data from the counties. So that's something we'll continue to do. One of the things that the state sort of desperately needs, counties are clamoring for, is research that demonstrates the effectiveness of various kinds of interventions and working with offenders. That's also something that we have built the data set to be able to provide. ability to do that kind of analysis is really contingent upon the counties being able to provide data on what exactly people are getting, when they're getting it, and some fairly detailed records. And we're in the process of, and have been over the last year and a half, working with counties to try and build that kind of data into the data set that we already have. And just as a sort of early update on that, that data is really not particularly strong at this moment. And so a lot of what we've been doing as we go around to the counties is sort of urging them to try and collect data in a way that could be merged into this data to allow exactly that kind of analysis. And then really the third major kind of goal of the project is to try and facilitate and aid counties who want to use data in their policy and planning activities to do so. And one of the things that we have provided as a result of you all providing us data is interactive dashboards, which we debuted for the Sheriff's Department in Sacramento and the Probation Chief's Department. I'm not going to talk about the data dashboards today, but that's a way in which we've taken your data, tried to add value to it and make it easy for you to kind of manipulate it and see what trends and patterns are apparent in that data. I should say, you should feel free to interrupt me at any time. We're all adult learners, and interaction is kind of the way we learn. So just to give you a little bit of kind of the architecture of the project, basically what we try to do is get sheriffs and probation departments to provide us with individual level data on the people moving through their systems. And then what we do is we link it to CDCR and DOJ data. That has taken a long time to kind of negotiate with those state agencies to facilitate, to allow us to do that. But last year they actually permitted us to make those matches, and we pretty quickly started to turn out reports on recidivism, and then in the summer here on Prop 47 that leveraged that state level data. And that data gives us really, in addition to sort of being able to know who the people are that are coming through, it allows us to attach their criminal history and to compute recidivism outcomes of a variety of sorts, for which are issues that I think many of you are probably interested in. The project has actually allowed us to sort of produce a number of research reports that, some of which are primarily descriptive, looking at how county correctional populations are changing. A lot of our work is focused on jail populations and how those have changed. We've done some work on pretrial well before the current reform. We've written about how probation populations are changing, how populations are changing in the wake of these reforms. But the two pieces that I want to highlight here are the pieces that look at the impacts of these state level reforms on recidivism and crime. And the first of those came out in December of last year. And the second, the impact of Prop 47, that took on both the impact of that reform on recidivism patterns, but also on crime. There was a lot of concern about whether or not Prop 47 would negatively impact crime rates. And so we did some work on that. So this is your jail data. Based on what you gave to us, we synthesized that, and it allows us to look at and this data we can get very granular with this data. So this is really just a broad picture, but it shows that in the aftermath, our data collection starts in October 2011 when realignment began. And you can see a sort of a steady sort of increase, modest increase in the average daily population of the jail. And then at the moment that Prop 47 hit, there was a sort of immediate drop. It's climbed a little bit since in the year or two afterwards. That's, I should say, also where our data ends at this point. One of the reasons why we want to make these presentations to counties is to solicit further participation in the project. You can also see that the drops in the jail population are primarily driven by drops in drug and property crimes, and that the brown, you can hardly see it, but it's the brown line there is the crimes against persons, which has remained relatively stable over that time period.
Riken, can I interject with a question? The graph that we're looking at, October of 2011, is obviously the point at which public safety realignment took effect in
That's right.
California. If we had graphed or shown, I'm sure you have the data prior to realignment taking effect, is it safe to assume that we would see some kind of increase prior to the advent of realignment in the jail ADP?
So we haven't collected any data before then, specifically on on Sacramento. Some of that data exists at the BSCC in the form of their jail profile survey. And what we saw is that jail populations across the state rose by about 9,000 inmates in the first year and a half after realignment, and so the prison population dropped by about, I think, 21,000 inmates, and the jails across the state sort of swelled by about 9,000 inmates. So it wasn't a complete displacement, right? It wasn't like for every one person released from jail, there was one person added to the jail population. And I presume that happened here, that there was increasing pressure as a result of sort of these new responsibilities, but that it didn't completely absorb all of the people who used to be sent into state prison. And then in more pertaining to Prop 47, this is data on bookings as opposed to daily population, and this is just the counts of the numbers of people in any given month coming into the jail population, into jail. And what we see is a sort of precipitous drop in the total population, driven almost entirely by a drop in felony offenses. And these are Prop 47 offenses, just the offenses, 6 offenses that were defined in Prop 47. You can see a big drop that is the reason why the jail population dropped. It was, in some ways, this is an intended consequence of Prop 47, which is to reduce the reliance on incarceration after the public expressed its will to downgrade certain crimes. Let's see here. And then this is the picture of probation. These are people starting probation from the period before and after realignment. You can see Prop 47 also had a big impact on probation, people starting probation, and the biggest impact was in Sacramento was on misdemeanor probation. So those dropped off enormously. Let's see.
Ryken, do you have any speculation as to? I'm trying to make sure I'm tracking the colors.
I know they're kind of, our PPIC color scheme is very limited. Or we have a limited palette, but
okay.
I think the misdemeanor is blue there, dark blue.
Okay, the brown is the top line for the probation. Graph,
felony probation,
right?
yeah.
That's felony probation, right?
Yeah, felony probation, yeah.
Do you have any speculation? Oh, I just touched my screen, not knowing it's touch sensitive. Do you have any speculation as to why felony probation starts began to increase after that big drop off?
No. We do see kind of increases statewide in felony probation in the 12 counties. We see some increases over time. It would be speculative. We're not exactly sure, because so data is great, but sometimes it obscures the decision making that goes on behind the data, as you probably well know. It could be that courts are imposing felony probation more often, just as a result of the changing landscape of options.
Right. I'm also puzzled by the misdemeanor probation starts, because I think one guess might have been that insofar as Prop 47 changed many felonies to misdemeanors, we would see an increase in misdemeanor probation starts. But it seems that we've seen the opposite, at least at the outset.
Yeah. I think generally the misdemeanor drop might be due to the fact that misdemeanor arrests Prop 47 offenses that were converted to misdemeanors were arrest at a lower rate, and people were booked into jail at a lower rate, and so there's sort of less of a pool of people who might end up getting misdemeanor probation at the end of the process, perhaps. But part of the reason for these kinds of visits is to hear from you about kind of what you think might be going on too, because that's actually quite helpful for us in making those interpretations. So the report that we did in December of last year was really focused on realignment. What we did is we wanted to analyze the changes in recidivism outcomes for the two populations that were in a sense kind of defined and created by realignment, which is the PRCS and the 1170H offenders who were released into counties. And the difficulty in doing research on this is that correctional populations are changed quite a bit, and just simply comparing those people released after with those people released before gives you a kind of a misleading picture, because one of the things that we discovered is that, for example, with the PRCS, that those individuals look different from the people who were released to parole supervision previously, in a way that made the folks released to counties somewhat higher risk. They had higher frequencies of offenses and things that are sort of associated with risk. So their recidivism rates might actually be higher than those released prior to realignment to parole. And in order to make apples to apples comparisons, you want to kind of make sure you're comparing people who have similar kinds of risk levels, because that way you can make more of an inference about what the difference of supervising them under probation is rather than parole. So we look at we do a number of kind of methodological techniques, apply a number of methodological techniques to try and make those people, to select those people in the pre-realignment period who are most similar to those people that were released here after realignment in these two groups. And the period we look at is people released from CDCR custody and supervised by parole from 2009 to 2011, the 2 years prior, and to realignment, and then the post-realignment people released in October through 2013. And there's some differences in the practices that prevailed in the old parole system, where people who were suspected of a parole violation were a segment of that group were brought to a reception center without a formal arrest emerging in the DOJ records. They were subjected to a revocation hearing, typically revoked back into state prison custody. And so another adjustment that needs to be made is in that procedural handling of misbehaving people under supervision. And so we try and make that adjustment to again, make more comparable what an arrest means in the post-realignment period, and make sure it's most similar to how people were being treated in the pre-realignment period. If we don't do that, because if you think about it, what that does is it deflates the pre-realignment arrest levels of CDCR releases, because some CDCR releases who had this revocation without an arrest were back in CDCR custody with no recorded arrest associated with them. That deflates and makes their misbehavior sort of less, their recidivism behavior essentially a lower rate. So again, we do a number of things that we can to make the strongest case that both the measures we're using and the populations that we're comparing are truly indeed comparable. Okay, so some of this material is in the report that we published. We published a report that covers the statewide picture across all 12 counties. Here I'm presenting both that those findings and the findings that are specific to Sacramento. So the first two columns here, the pre and the post comparison, these are estimates of the rearrest rate within 2 years. No, this is, do you remember if this? 2 years, thank you, of individuals released into the 12 counties is the first column. And you can see the PRCS offenders had a somewhat higher rearrests in the 12 counties, about 5 percentage points higher. And again, just sort of, it's hard to attribute exactly what this might be for. I'm not sure it's necessarily it should be seen as a negative thing. These data come from the first 2 years of realignment when counties were adjusting to the new responsibilities. These are also PRCS offenders who previously in some ways would have been the small fish in the pond in parole are now kind of the most serious folks that are coming onto probation, and they're being supervised probably with more scrutiny than they were previously under parole. In which case, a slightly higher rearrest rate might make some sense. They weren't watched as closely under parole supervision as they were under probation supervision. In Sacramento, we see pretty much the same pattern, a slightly higher. Was there a question?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Just a quick question, thank you. I want to just go over that again. So you're saying we shouldn't be that concerned about a higher rearrest rate because why?
Because the orange bar there are people who were released from CDCR and supervised by state parole. The blue line is people supervised by county probation departments. And under the parole system, these were individuals who are in some ways the least concern. They were the lower level offenders. When they have sexual, violent, serious and violent offenders, those are the ones that draw a lot of the intensity of the supervision. They're supervised on high levels of control, and so the folks that are sort of in the triage system, sort of lower ranking, receive less scrutiny, fewer drug tests, fewer home visits, fewer meetings with their, these are many people, if you recall, a segment of the parole population in pre-realignment where could be on summary parole. Non-revocable parole, I guess is what they call it, actually. Non-revocable parole, which was an extremely low level of contact with the parole supervision agent. So they just weren't subject. So then jump forward, now they're in probation, and they're the prison-hardened segment of the probation population. They're going to be move up the triage hierarchy and watched quite a bit more carefully. It could be that there's a potential negative story. I suppose if they're released to probation and probation has not yet kind of established all of the supports and services and things like that, which seems quite possible in the first 2 years, then you might expect that there'd be some more failures as a result of those systems. If that were the case, then you'd expect improvement going forward, right? That these lines would either come closer to one another, or you would see the blue line go down. We don't know that at this point because we don't have the data that allows us to forecast forward. Part of the reason why one can't really ever take a snapshot of recidivism and declare victory or failure, you have to kind of look at change over time.
I do think that your initial explanation, there's probably at least some merit to that. Now, whether that's a full and complete explanation, we don't know, but working at CDCR at the time, right up prior to realignment, it certainly was the case that the kind of people who are on post-release community supervision now used to be what were called minimum contacts, which essentially meant that they were not supervised in the field. So on the one hand, that would mean, as you pointed out, Riken, that post-realignment, now that they're under probation supervision, we've certainly put more resources. We're going to have more engagement, more arrests, more visits, more surveillance, more supervision. You could see an uptick in arrests as a failure. I do not see it that way. I see it as more engagement, more supervision, more surveillance. Ultimately, if the long-term outcomes are that these are people who are just being churned through the system, then I don't think any of us would see that as a long-term success. But insofar as we're engaging with them and arresting and incarcerating the right people, and then diverting or offering treatment or services to the right population as well, I think that heightened level of engagement is a good thing. I do think that too often, if there's no supervision whatsoever and we ignore people in the community, we claim initial victory because they're silent and under the radar, and we think, they haven't been arrested, their head hasn't popped up, that must be a good thing. And then we come to find out that very serious or violent offenses at some point occur.
Lee, is there any reason to, given what you just said and what you said, are we to assume that the folks who now are out on probation, under your supervision, are, a higher risk to the community than the ones who used to be out under the supervision of state parole?
I wouldn't necessarily assume that. I think they've done I think Riken would say that they've done their best to match that population, so it really is similar. So I wouldn't suggest necessarily that the person prior to 2011 is that much different than the matched person now. But I can tell you anecdotally, if we had our probation officers in here who were assigned to those PRCS teams and were out there doing the work, they would tell you almost without exception that this is a very high risk, churning, kind of younger, a lot of, when you see a younger population that still where the risk of recidivism is highest, a lot of kind of misdemeanor level offenses, all those things are red flags, and that tends to indicate people who are still getting into trouble as opposed to a population that might be aging out.
Yeah. So one of the features of realignment by design was to send offenders who were whose commitment offense was not serious or violent. Susan Turner, UC Irvine, wrote a paper very early on and said, well, the truth is that those are the offenders that actually are the churners and the ones that rack up a lot of offenses. So in some ways, the people who are coming out from long prison terms, having committed a serious or violent offense, are often lower risk to reoffend, ironically. And so realignment in a way kind of gave counties a segment of those PRCS are actually quite high risk. So that's something that has been discussed, because the designation of who was eligible for county supervision under realignment was made on the basis of offenses and their current offenses. So that meant that probation actually did take on a segment of that PRCS population is actually quite high risk, higher risk than some of the people that remain on parole. Okay, so moving on to reconviction, and you would expect, I think, this is kind of implicitly a good argument for why it's important to use multiple measures of recidivism, because they don't always tell exactly the same story. You can see that in the statewide, in the 12 counties, slightly higher reconviction rates for PRCS offenders. Again, that kind of makes sense. If they're getting rearrested more, you'd see somewhat higher reconviction rates. In Sacramento County, it actually kind of went the opposite direction, which is that there were a fairly substantial drop in reconvictions, which suggests that some alternatives to reconviction were being pursued in a pretty, kind of sustained way. And again, I want to emphasize this is still really kind of, at this point, still an early picture. What people, I guess, need to understand that when you do recidivism analysis, you have to take a group of people who enter in a year or 2 year period and then follow them for 2 years or 3 years, ideally 3 years after they're released. And so the complete picture of these things has to be, it takes a while for us to understand at this point we would be just learning the 2014 and 2015 1 year and 2 year rates of recidivism, just to give you a sense. So there's a lag of this. Okay, so this is the 1170H segment of offenders. In the state, in the 12 counties, we see no difference really at all in terms of 1178s. They're rearrested at almost identical rates as they were previously. In Sacramento, it's actually a little bit lower. These are primarily individuals who are released after serving straight sentences. Again, this is the early first 2 cohorts essentially after realignment. So these are people who mostly received releases from straight rather than split sentences. Reconviction rates across the state are significantly lower, 3 percentage points. Not a large difference, but a statistically significant one. And then even larger differences in reconviction here in Sacramento. So just contrasting a little bit on the split versus straight kind of approaches, it's very hard to say a lot about the splits because the numbers are pretty small, but people want to know, so we looked at that. In the MCS counties overall, the straight sentence group had better recidivism outcomes when compared with the pre-realignment group. The split sentence group, people who had a tail of supervision by probation, had higher rearrest, but actually lower reconviction. So they're being arrested, but there's something happening between the point of arrest and reconviction that is actually different from what was happening prior to realignment. And then in Sacramento, there's not really any difference, like the state as a whole, not any difference in the rearrest for the straight group. The reconviction rates are lower. Again, that was apparent on the previous slide, reflecting on the previous slide, because the previous slide sort of reflected the straight. And then we don't find any difference in the outcomes for the split sentence group. And again, part of the reason for that is the numbers are pretty small. And again, going forward, we'll have more numbers. We might be able to discern some differences in the split sentenced folks. Okay, so, and then in June, we published a second report that looked at Prop 47 and its impact on recidivism. We took a similar approach of trying to identify people post Prop 47 who had been convicted of Prop 47 offenses and compare them with similar people prior to Prop 47 and compare them. And the time periods are there. It includes the pre-group includes people released November 2011 to October 2012, and then the post-group is November 2014 to October 2015, which is the end point of the data collection that we have. And the recidivism findings are somewhat consistent with the overall. This slide has a little bit different organization to it. I'm going to show you the statewide patterns, and the next one will be the same measures, but for Sacramento. So it's a little bit confusing. Prop 47 is among the 12 counties. We saw sort of small decreases in the arrests for any offense among people who were convicted of Prop 47 offenses. We can see that small difference is really driven by differences in Prop 47 arrests for Prop 47 offenses. And then when we further break down Prop 47 offenses between those that relate to property offenses and those related to drug, we can see that the difference in how Prop 47 offenses were, the rate at which they were arrested is driven primarily from a big drop in Prop 47 drug offense arrest rates rather than property rates. Now in Sacramento, we sort of see a somewhat different pattern. We actually see an increase in the arrest rates, rearrest rates in Sacramento. We're not exactly sure what accounts for that. We see even among Prop 47 offenses a slight increase in those offenses. This suggests that perhaps that some of those misdemeanor arrests, some of those offenses that previously were felonies that got downgraded were still pursued, were still resulted in arrests in Sacramento County, as opposed to most of the other counties, which sort of began to sort of not bring those kinds of offenders into the system, and we see that increase in Sacramento for arrests for Prop 47 offense is actually driven by the property offense piece of this. The drug offenses are a little bit lower, but that difference is actually not statistically significant, which means that roughly the rate at which people were arrested for drug offenses, Prop 47 drug offenses, drug possession primarily, was roughly the same as it was prior to realignment. And then the story about convictions for the 12 counties is, again, sort of mirrors the arrest story to some degree. Again, the post Prop 47 group of people convicted of Prop 47 offenses have lower reconviction rates. And the lower reconviction rates result from lower Prop 47 offenses. So part of what this is, I think, revealing is that Prop 47 offenders are likely to be repeat offenders, and so the drops in arrests for those it accounts for sort of the big drop in the reconvictions. And both the Prop 47 property offenses and the Prop 47 drug offenses are really combining to produce that decrease in convictions after 47. So, and then in Sacramento, we see the first line of reconvictions for any offense somewhat higher in Sacramento. That is a statistically significant, almost 5 percentage point difference. But we see drops in convictions for Prop 47 offenses driven, again, both by convictions for Prop 47 property and drug offenses. And so, you know, I think one of the things that I think might be going on here is that in Sacramento, people who are Prop 47 offenses probably had other kinds of offenses that they were committing along with them, and what the downgrading of Prop 47 has potentially caused the prosecution for those other offenses instead of Prop 47 offenses, and so you don't see the drop necessarily that you see in other counties. But I'm also open to interpretations that you might have about why we see this particular pattern here. Okay. Before I go on to next steps, are there any questions or comments about the Prop 47 piece of this?
Yeah, we have a question from Kathy Lester.
Get my mic on. Yeah, just a quick question. Yeah. The data that you're providing, are these only for custodial arrests, or do they include cite and release arrests as well for misdemeanors?
Our data come from DOJ, and so arrests that occur in the field that don't result in a jail booking that are captured are included. Historically, not all arrests in the field have been entered into the system, and I don't know what the pattern is in Sacramento County, but other counties it could be a large number. So we could potentially be missing some of those arrests that are occurring in the field that do not result in a DOJ record. Now, you may know there's two ways. One, you come into jail, that record gets into the DOJ because you get fingerprinted and it goes into the automated criminal history system. Many places have can do fingerprinting in the field and then enter it through a manual process later on. So nobody really knows exactly how many arrests are missed through that system. We have a sense that it maybe has improved quite a bit over the last several years, but we still don't know exactly how many arrests might be missed through that process.
Okay, thank you.
My colleague Justin Goss is actually here as well. He worked on this project, but he also works on the arrest project. Do you want to say anything about field arrests that are not, do we know anything further from that project?
Do I need to come to the microphone?
Yes, please, if you would.
Yeah,
Welcome, Mr. Goss.
Thank you. What Riken said is essentially correct. Our data from Sacramento and the multi-county as a whole do contain cite and release data, but prior to this report, we did some informational interviews with our different county contacts and found that there was high variance in terms of the level of rigor that counties are able to apply when they conduct field citations. So, for instance, we were told in San Bernardino that most of those slip through the cracks, whereas in Los Angeles they have mobile fingerprinting kits, or officers take the time to actually drive cite and releases or cites in the field to the department so they can be fingerprinted. So that is an omitted aspect of our models that's not going to show up in our sample. Thanks.
Presumably, it would have an important impact only if those respective counties change their practices over time, therefore conflating
I think that's a good
so
way
long
to
as
think
they're
about it.
consistent, we're going to more or less.
Criminal justice record keeping is an imperfect enterprise, and there's some invisible things that can't be tracked. The best thing to do is to try and acknowledge when that's the case.
Riken, can you talk a little bit? The slide we're looking at right now talks about next steps. Is there an ongoing commitment by PPIC to continue this work? Is there an anticipated endpoint? I hesitate to wonder also, given the number of criminal justice changes that just continue to take place. Are we going to see a Prop 57 report? Are we going to see Prop 64 marijuana legalization impacts at some point down the road?
Yeah, the one that we've talked about most is the Prop 57 report. There's nothing. So PPIC's process is a very long, deliberative process about selecting what projects are going to kind of come through. There's been a lot of discussion, but no firm commitment to doing a Prop 47 project yet. The marijuana decrim is also similar. I would say that one's at an earlier stage of discussion. So I can't make any commitments because that's part of PPIC. I don't actually control. In terms of the commitment to the project, that is actually also something that is made at the higher levels of the organization. We feel like this has just been an incredibly useful project, both for giving the Institute visibility and departing from some of the other kinds of policy research work that PPIC does, because the dimension of this work about sort of doing what I'm doing here today, which is kind of coming back and providing it back to the people who actually provided us with the data, rather than just publishing a report and trying to get in the newspapers. I hope that that's valued and that we can kind of continue to keep doing this. But yeah.
Well, for my part, I certainly think it's been extremely valuable, and I thank you for all the work that PPIC has done and you and your team. I think we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Back to the question, then at least fair to say for now that the work continues and it's ongoing, no endpoint in sight, at least at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adding on to the 57 and the marijuana analysis, two other reports that are in the early stages are a revisitation of Prop 47, because in the report we primarily looked at the impact on Prop 47 offenses. So we want to go back and look at, was there an impact on non-Prop 47 offenses in terms of the working theory that by taking away the stick method, by taking away the threat of incarceration, did it cause other types of non-Prop 47 offenses to go up? So we're going to be looking at that, or that's our plan. And then also in the early stages is using the multi-county data to examine with the recent legislation on bail reform. We want to look at how the multi-county, or the counties in our study, how their pretrial population is going to be affected.
Interesting.
Yeah, and while he was talking, I remember one other, which is that we have a paper that's that we're developing on, that's specifically looking at felony probation, and that's something we haven't, it's not just on felony probation, it's on options for sort of sanctioning the felony probation or felony offenders, and the reason for that is that in some ways what all these reforms have done is give us a kind of range of options from for often similar kinds of offenders. People can be given a split sentence, a straight sentence, a felony probation, or they can have a split jail time and be on felony probation. So there's a range of options that we sort of learned about the existence of that we want to do something about. If you have the same kind of offender, you give them a split versus a straight, or you send them straight to felony probation. What are the outcomes? How do the outcomes vary for those kinds of folks? Hopefully that'd be kind of useful information to decision makers locally. So, yeah.
Well, I'd like to invite any last questions before we wrap up. While people are perhaps thinking of any questions they may have, I do want to also say that I know at the outset you said that you weren't here today to speak in too much depth about the dashboard effort, but I do want to at least acknowledge that and thank you for it, because what's happening right now is not only is PPIC making this data available, and we're committed to making it available to the public, and as there's been kind of long awaited interest in this subject, I very much appreciate that. But what the team has also done, and I understand the commitment has been extended to all the participating counties, is to actually turn over the sortable data to the respective departments for us to be able to use and drive our own analyses, going so far as to even work with our IT people to kind of help stand it up. And my understanding is some of those efforts have already started here in Sacramento
That's right,
County,
yeah.
at least with the probation department. And that's fantastic. I've never heard of that with any research group, really trying to not just, as you said, grab that headline with a splashy report, but actually helping the stakeholders understand their own data, which I think is enormously valuable. So I thank you for that, and I know you'll be back next week, and we might perhaps talk a little bit more about that effort, but that's very useful for all of us, because I know even just having our data, I'm able to share it with all the people up here on the dais alongside probation, and I think they're very interested in knowing what's going on with various outcomes associated with our work.
Terrific.
Any last questions? Yeah, please. Your mic.
Question about convictions, or the conviction data. Does it refer to, or do you have in the data an ability to tell if it's a conviction for drunken public or petty theft? And if you do, was there any thought to doing a reduction in harm analysis, which essentially, what I mean by that is somebody was committing more serious crimes, they're still committing crimes, but now they're stealing a beer as opposed to stealing 6 cars out of someone's garage, kind of thing. So
That's a great suggestion. That's the first time we've heard that suggestion, and we do have a lot of detail in conviction charges, all the way down to the penal code section that's at stake. So, I'll take that suggestion back to the team. Appreciate it.
So the conviction data we have here is any conviction right now, including
Yeah.
drunk in public, for
Yeah.
example.
It-
All right.
all the conviction data comes from DOJ records. So whatever whatever disposition in terms of conviction is sent to DOJ is what we have. So it's quite rich data. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is an important point. It's something that we're often interested in with probation work. When we go out and do a search, let's say, and we find a felon in possession of a firearm or something along those lines, in a sense, as some of the folks up here have heard me say before, in a sense that represents a kind of failure insofar as it counts as recidivism, and here this person is getting, presumably going to be convicted of felon in possession. We see that as a kind of half success. Obviously, our goal is that nobody ever recidivates and people don't possess firearms if they're a felon. But given the worst option, which could be that felon using that gun in some way to harm a victim, we much would rather see that felon in possession charge. I always tell my people, if they're, that's what we're looking for. If we can't have perfection, that's the next best thing. Yeah. And when you compare those two recidivism events, they're often counted the same if in a 0-1 kind of alternative system, but the felon in possession charges and convictions are always, I see them as partial successes as opposed to, something much worse.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We'll discuss it.
Any other questions comments from anybody else? Okay, well, again, I thank PPIC. I thank you both for coming here today. The ongoing work with Sacramento County, we've found it enormously useful. So thank you all very much. We look forward to having you back. Okay, at this time, we will call our second agenda item.
Item number 2, approve recommended 2019 CCP meeting calendar and CCP bylaw amendments to align it with the changes to the regular meeting calendar.
Thank you very much. Ms. York, do you want to walk us through this item?
Sure. The CCP has one primary goal, which is to provide a plan for AB 109 realignment, which is currently a long-term plan in place, so we no longer need to meet as frequently as historically, and the bylaws have not been updated to reflect the lesser need. So I'm suggesting that next year we change our schedule to twice per year, in April and in October. And to reflect that change, I simply suggest that we change Article 5, Section A on page 2, Article 10, Section F on page 5. There's two sections, page 2 and page 5, that represent the meetings, and I just wanted to update those to reflect that change. And you'll note then in the amended version, it's a bit shorter, so I also did take liberty to do some adjustments to the formatting, but other than the content on the meeting frequency, those are the only suggested changes.
Okay, great. So we have basically two things happening. The main primary goal here is to change our bylaws to reflect an April and October meeting going forward.
Correct.
Along with that, there were just some formatting or cosmetic changes that we
Correct.
don't need to concern ourselves with. Okay. Any questions from anybody about these proposed changes or discussion before I ask for a vote?
Move approval?
Okay, with that, I will not attempt to use the technological version. I'm permitted to ask for a voice vote. Is that all right?
We can do it. I have everybody in there today.
Okay, great. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, I guess we do have our vote made easy right in front of us. Please vote.
Unanimous vote with those members present.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. At this time, I'll ask if there's any members of the public wishing to speak on either any agenda item or non-agenda item. Did we receive any requests? No requests. Okay, this concludes our meeting today. Thank you all very much.